Welcome once again, warriors, to the worst fighting game, my epic journey to ascend the Tower of Terribleness and find someone or something that can dethrone Criticom as the all-encompassing Emperor of Embarrassment. Fortunately, this week's contender is not only a poor example of the 90s 2D fighter, but also stands as one of the several root causes as to why another genre and series altogether, in this case Double Dragon, further fell from its late 80s peak. This 1994 release puzzled many a child at the time because any game with a giant Roman numeral on the cover typically denoted the latest sequel, which this absolutely wasn't. It's instead based off the American cartoon adaptation of Double Dragon, but was also spun off into a fighting game rather than what everyone expected, which was a hair-pulling belt scroller. This is like calling Mortal Kombat Special Forces Mortal Kombat 5 Jax's Revenge and then expect fans to be happy with what they were given. And just like Special Forces, the Shadow Falls disappoints in pretty much every area, proving that it's not ever easy to transfer the appeal of one franchise over to another genre. It can be done, certainly, but publisher Tradewest and developer the Leland Corporation / Interactive Media were simply not the ones to make this change. Why? Well, they didn't follow the code of the dragon! Hell yeah. Anyway, we won't know for sure if Double Dragon 5 can make a viable run at Criticom's record-breaking 18 months at the very top, or rather bottom, until we get it in the ring! Quick recap, Double Dragon was a massive cash cow for Technos in the early days, so much so that they licensed the IP to anyone and everyone, not really caring if the work they produced was, well, you know, good. The American publisher they struck a deal with in the early 90s, Tradewest, who took over from Acclaim, wasn't much different, greenlighting a few things that maybe didn't necessarily need to happen. This all came to a head with the 1993 Saturday morning cartoon, which sought to make the property a bit more kid-friendly, as a post-apocalyptic lawless wasteland where innocent women are murked in the opening few seconds wasn't going to fly with most parents. The show was very silly, featuring bad puns, ridiculous neon-clad villains, gimmicky spring-loaded vehicles, but had a banger of a theme song. But someone at Tradewest, or Deke Entertainment, felt it was time to synergize, so why not make a game based off the cartoon that's based off a game? But instead of making a new brawler, which to be fair were starting to die out, they felt it best to just jump on that big fighting game craze that all the kids were going nuts for. Oh, and let's call it Double Dragon 5, you know, to lie to them. To make this new fighting game, they then got the best studio for the job. And when I say the best, I mean the one that had zero experience in fighting games. Enter the Leland Corporation, originally called Cinematronics, who designed and distributed the arcade hardware that ran FMV games like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, but they never really hit it big designing their own titles. In fact, they fell ass first into Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 1987, and thus were bought out by Tradewest in what's been described as a hostile takeover. They were then rebranded to the much sexier Leland Corporation, and then the Leland Media Concern or Conglomerate, whatever, which itself was named after Leland Cook, one of Tradewest's founders. Under this new exciting direction, they made pretty much nothing of note. I guess Super Off-Road the Baja? Anyway, it was now their job to adapt a children's TV show based on a Japanese beat-em-up franchise, but to make it into a fighting game, and the Shadow Falls is what they ended up with. Now, as far as I can tell, the Double Dragon cartoon wasn't really a success. It lasted for about 1 year, ran for 26 episodes, and I didn't even know it existed until like 15 years after it had been cancelled. So you can imagine the wave of confusion I, and many others at that time, had to go through when they first rented this. Who are all these characters? Where's a Bobo, Willie, or Marion? Well, they were either repackaged or written out of the show altogether. together, but if you didn't know the show existed, you wouldn't have a clue. I guess that's why they had to include the "based on the hit TV show nobody knows about" sticker on the box. Speaking of the different boxes and therefore versions, Leland Corp put out 2 on both the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. However, there was a third port that slashed onto the worst fighting game's favorite console, the Atari Jaguar, which, oh boy, we're gonna need to get into. This version, which was released in 1995, was ported by Telegames, and well, it's pretty rough. I guess they had zero experience working on the Jag. Oh wait, no, they actually put out like 6 other titles. They also made the terrible Lynx port of the original Double Dragon 2 years earlier. How about that shit? I assume Telegames was chosen for that reason, or because Leland and the boys had their hands full at that time with Kyle Petty's No Fear Racing. So be forewarned, I am going to be bullying the crap out of the Jag version, which is something I will not be taking any pleasure in. Oh wait, I kinda will. So there's something we have to talk about right off the bat, or chained mace, or pocket knife, or any of the other Double Dragon weapon staples this game ignores. This was designed to emulate the look of a cheap 90s cartoon show, so there's not much you can say about its art style or even the character designs, because Leland Corp really couldn't do much about that. Fortunately, the game does make a good first impression with the moody title screen, showcasing the main villain of the franchise, the Shadow Master, who isn't the main villain at all. The Double Dragon series itself has had a long and fractured history of who the leader of the antagonistic force is, cause it seems to change game by game. Menus look okay for as far as menus go, and the fighter select and stage screens are all pretty attractive with plenty of color. The in-game graphics look, I mean, they're serviceable, I suppose. I think the stages hold up a little better than the sprites themselves, as they are eye-catching and have plenty of detail and animation. The music is likewise serviceable. There's 2 to 3 catchy tracks in there, but what really hurts it is the lack of any classic Double Dragon themes. I mean, the series already had some pretty iconic tunes by '94, so to not even hear one remix is a massive missed opportunity. Now, putting aside the music, DD5's sound effects are a whole other, much more awful thing. The announcer has to be in the bottom 10 of the worst I've ever heard, which really, well, wait a minute. No, I gotta stay on track. A dynamic and fun announcer can actually do quite a bit to make a game feel memorable, but here we just got this robotic, uncharismatic filing cabinet of a guy just going,
"Match 1, fight, countdown, win, match 2, fight," over
and over again. The fighters themselves aren't much better. They all have these weird win quotes that you can barely understand, as pretty much all the speech sounds super bit crushed and low quality. And then there's the actual sound effects. Everything has this odd, shrill tone to it, from the clanging of swords to the gunfire to the impacts of fists on flesh. It's a rare L in video games where the sound is so bad it actually stands out, but I don't know, it's just irritating to have to listen to. I guess now I know how most of my fans feel. Now thankfully, once you've dragon shocked your way through the arcade ladder and vanquished the Shadow Master, you are treated to an ending for your fighter of choice. Now, they're nothing special, precisely 1 screen and 1 sentence long, and are as deep as, "After defeating Shadow Dude, Himbo Jimmy made his date just in time." But hey, at least it's something. So looking at the Shadow Falls presentation as a whole, there's nothing super egregious here. I mean, sure, every single element could be better, but nothing here is offensively bad. That is, until you start looking at the other versions, and when I say other, I mean it's time to bully the Jaguar. Before we pick on the little guy though, it should be noted it and the Genesis version are rated T for teen, while the SNES version is not. This is because blood was changed to a white goo. Okay, I really hope that's sweat. Anyway, blood makes sense given that so many of the fighters have pokey, slashy weapons, although oddly, the fighter made out of bones, Bones still bleeds the same as anyone. There is one really weird technical quirk with the blood though. Once it hits the ground, you have to wait for it to dissipate and completely leave the screen before the round can end. So an extra 4 to 5 seconds each and every time.
Billy Lee win.
This is so awkward, and it's just like, why is it gotta be like that? Give me your theories in the comments below. What's just as weird is the violence in general. They made the game adaptation of a Saturday morning cartoon more gory. When does that ever happen? Okay, where was I? Right. Dumping on the Jaguar. Now, look at this. Just look at it. I have no idea why, but Telegames decided to color over the original sprite work and portraits with the hottest version of MS Paint circa 1995. It's such a massive downgrade, and I can't fathom the reasoning behind it. And why does it look so familiar? It's just, oh no. I think this was somehow an attempt to make the Jaguar version look better, or maybe not better, but different. Regardless of the visual intent, the Jag is worse across the board. The sound mixing is terrible, with the music overpowering all the other audio, among other problems. But in truly one of the most baffling decisions I've ever covered on this show, this newer version of the game omitted 3 characters and all their stages. So if you mained Blade, Ice Pick, or Trigger happy in the 16-bit versions, don't bother tracking this one down. Not stupid enough for you? Well, here's some more. They then took the time to add Dominique, the sub-boss, into the regular roster. Why did you take out 3 characters but added 1 more?
It makes no damn sense. Compels me though.
I'm starting to feel dizzy, so let's just move on to... Straight up, there are very few mechanics worth talking about in DTV TSF. You have 6 buttons, honestly way more than anyone would need, 3 special moves per character, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Remember, this is 1994, when fighters were rapidly evolving with things like crazier combos and super moves, so the fact that Double Dragon literally does nothing new or interesting pretty much doomed it, so that some 29 years later, idiots like me would be talking shit about it on the internet. Like, give me something, a defensive mechanic like the parry grabs from Super Double Dragon, or the little rage meter you could build up. Like, that game was released 2 years earlier. Just use that stuff. Now, I know what some of you are going to say. Hey, Buff Skeleton, what about the overkills? Yes, there is a fatality system, but it ain't really worth talking about, so I'm not gonna, even if you beg me for it. Okay, I'll just tell you anyway. Overkills are weird in that every fighter has a specific attack button assigned to them that if you finish them off with, they'll react with a unique death animation. So, for example, if you hit Jawbreaker with a standing medium punch, his teeth fall out. Get it? Because his name is Jawbreaker. Or if you do a crouching kick, Sickle just spins himself into an oblivion like he just lost a game of Crossfire. Obviously, all of these are super lame, as I guess they had to be, as they really couldn't push the envelope past the teen rating, so this Looney Tunes shit is what you get. But what's worse is that overkills don't even factor into the moment-to-moment gameplay because the last button you press has to kill them to trigger the animation. This is unlike, say, an Ultra Combo or Ultimate, which can be formed at a low but not critical health threshold, and thus can end a match slightly quicker. Now, while it's true MK's fatalities were also superfluous animations, they were at least visceral and satisfying to perform, and also gave you a giant point bonus. But DD5's overkills are literally useless. And in a really small footnote, you can also assign a few points to different attributes for your fighter, but I honestly couldn't really tell a difference. Let's move on. Things get a bit more positive with modes. There's your standard arcade tournament versus a CPU battle and a quest mode. Here you can either pick Bimmy or Jammy and stop the Shadow Master from to dumping tons of drugs all over the city, or help the Shadow Master in this plot and to hopefully become his second in command, with each side having a distinct ending depending on the difficulty. While that sounds neat, all this mode amounts to is getting bossed around either by this old dude or the Shadow Master in quick dialogue sequences before each and every match, and that's really it. This honestly could have just been folded into the main arcade mode and no one really would have noticed. Also, for some reason, Quest mode was taken out of the Jag port completely. Jesus Christ. Finally, there's the Dossier mode, which is just a collection of biographies of every fighter. Now, it's a stretch to call this a mode, but it is nice you can read these whenever you boot the game up rather than having to crack open the instruction manual. Jeez, I'm surprised. Can the Jag even run this bit of the game? And finally, there's no training option, like at all. It's 1994, Leland Corporation. How are we supposed to lab when, oh wait, there's no unique mechanics and very little tech, so it would have been pointless. Let's move on. So, historically, Game Feel has dragged down otherwise decent titles into the lower annals of the worst fighting game tier list, but fortunately, in Double Dragon 5's case, that's still very much the case. It's hard to pinpoint, but something about this game just feels bad to play. It's a combination of the sound effects, animation, and special moves that give everything an unsatisfying feel. I assume that's because this was Leland and crew's first go at a fighting game and they didn't have much experience with the nuances, and also probably pressured to slap this thing together while the cartoon was still relevant, if it ever was. Now, as a positive, it plays pretty fast, maybe a bit too fast, which affects the animation as many attacks are like 1 to 2 frames long, so it gives the game this button mashy feel. Conversely, the vast majority of special moves have stupid long startup times, so normals seem to beat them out pretty much in every instance. After 5 minutes of play, you realize that continually abusing hard strikes or finding whatever good button each character has is way more optimal than using specials. Again, I don't think Leland had the time they needed to fine-tune all of this stuff. With all that said, I still prefer this bad game feel to a lot of the other bad game feels I've discussed on this show, like with Brutal or Human Killing Machine. I would like it to be noted, however, that the Jaguar version feels far and distinctly worse than its 16-bit counterparts. Also, for bonus points, if you hate yourself and decide to play this on real Jag hardware, hard punches are on the top 3 buttons, while all your kicks are locked to the war crime that is the numerical section of the Jag controller. I hate it. Oh god. Anyway, let's just see where this lands on our tier list.
Dragon win!
I was devastated back in my short pants wearing days when I first rented Double Dragon 5 The Shadow Falls, because while I didn't know exactly what I was going to get, I assumed it was going to be a fleshed out version of the NES versus mode from Double Dragon 1, but on 16-bit hardware. I clearly did not get that, what with it being chained to the lame cartoon canon, there not being anything particularly cool or unique about the mechanics, the awful sound effects, and the poor game feel. However, all that does get somewhat balanced out by the decent graphics, music, there not being anything overtly atrocious, and the fact that at the end of the day, I still always loved me some Double Dragon. No, not that one! As for its placement on our tier list of trash, well, you can probably see this one coming, but hey, all you stinky weirdos, make some room for your new neighbor. There you go, you're home now, my friend. Fortunately, Double Dragon still got 2 much better fighters later on, so I can't be too mad with the Shadow Falls at the end of the day. And speaking of the end, that concludes another epic episode. And if any of you Dragon Warriors out there know of any other foul contenders that could vie for Criticom's crown, do let me know in the comments below or over on my Twitter. So until then, fellow fighters, I'll see you next time on the worst fighting game.
To be a dragon, you gotta be strong, humble, never bragging. Always fight for right, battling wrong with the power of the dragon.